Hey book readers! During my book reading career, I've cracked open 16 Orson Scott Card books. Obviously, some are better than others, so let's go through and rank them from worst to first. Which ones do I think are the most in-card-ible, and which ones should be Orson Scott discarded forever? The worst of the bunch, in my opinion, is a light paranormal fantasy called Lost Boys, and it promises supernatural intrigue but gets too into the weeds of boring small-town life. The story is about the Fletcher family who move to a new town, and if there's ever a novel that tries to convince you to never move, this is it. The father in this family, named Step, starts working at an awful computer programming job with terrible coworkers and bosses, and the son, named Stevie, struggles to adapt. Sure, he makes friends, but they're, invisible? There's a chilling atmosphere and dark forces at play, but the snail's pace and mishmash of genres didn't work or keep my attention at all. Number 15 is Children of the Mind. The fourth and final book in the Ender saga nearly came dead last in my OSC rankings. I won't even bother trying to explain the plot because if you didn't read the 3 other books in this series, it won't make any sense or sound interesting at all. Honestly, it's almost better characterized as a book of philosophy rather than sci-fi because there's hardly any action or suspense. Other complaints I have is that the plot is too busy, there are a bunch of heavy ideas that just don't work together, and it branched too far out from the original material. Oh, and let me keep going. Unlikable characters, huge generalizations about how a planet's inhabitants are nearly all the same, and an ending that's telegraphed from miles away. This book is blah. Only read it if you're a hardcore fan of Ender's Game. Up next is The Memory of Earth. This book takes place on a utopic world aptly named Harmony. An AI watches over the planet to protect humanity from progress, war, and itself. Then the AI supercomputer called the Oversoul malfunctions and society starts to go downhill. Like the other 2 books I've already talked about, this one's really easy to figure out. You pretty much know the direction it's heading from the jump. There are 5 books in this series, but I only read this one. It was solid, but didn't hook me quite enough to keep plugging along. Next on my list is Enchantment. This is one of OSC's rare standalone novels. It's a retelling of Sleeping Beauty with a Russian twist. Not only that, but it features 2 things I've covered extensively on my channel: time travel and Baba Yaga. Ivan is the main character, and he's a scholar of Russian folklore who discovers a sleeping princess in the woods. Classic fairy tale situation. However, when he wakes up the princess, named Katerina, he's transported back in time to ancient Russia, where he finds himself in a battle against the witch Baba Yaga. It's got charm, magic, humor, and heart, plus some fun with past and present things, letting Ivan and Katerina learn from each other's worlds. It's fine for a palate-cleansing fantasy book, but it's too slow and cheesy to be anything other than a guilty pleasure read. Next up is Xenocide, which is book 3 in the Ender saga. I'm really not even going to name characters or settings because if you haven't read the other 2 in this series, it'll be nearly impossible for you to follow. But also, this book goes far beyond a simple sci-fi adventure with multiple sentient species. Gone are the days of Ender's Game with battles and strategies. We're now well into the realm of religion, spirituality, biology, morality, and philosophy. Deep topics that require deep thought. In a nutshell, this is where the Ender saga gets complex. That's not a bad thing though, you just have to pay really close attention to understand and appreciate everything OSC is trying to weave together. Bottom line, it's a tangled web that isn't for the faint of heart. But if you wrap your head around it, you might just be blown away. Moving along to the next book on my list, which is Shadow Puppets, and that's book 3 in the Ender Shadow or Bean series. We're back with Bean in this fast-paced book that features a lot of global politics and military maneuvering, similar in some ways to a Game of Thrones. Someone described this to me as the book version of the board game Risk, which seems to hit the nail right on the head. Bean and Ender's brother, named Peter, if you remember from Ender's Game, are struggling to unite humanity. War is raging as different territories are gaining and losing power. Of course, it's tough because genius military kids from the battle school are guiding militaries far and wide, which makes sense because they're all from all over the globe and have allegiances to their home countries. It goes without saying that this book is full of big picture strategy, and it can get emotional at times too. There's a ton of inner conflict for the main characters, along with an excellent supporting group of teen prodigies, plus great back and forth between Bean and Petra, and a search that's happening for a solution to Bean's predicament. And the cherry on top of it all is that Bean finally gets his showdown with the ultimate bad guy, Achilles. Seriously, Achilles is one of my favorite bad dudes in literature. He's a well-rounded villain that's miles above anything James Bond would serve up. If you read this book for no other reason than Achilles, it's time well spent. Let's keep moving right along to The Gate Thief, which is book 2 in the Myther Mages series. We'll get more into this dark fantasy series in a minute, but the long and short of it is that Danny North is a high school kid with powers that let him control gates between worlds. If you like the MCU, this might be your cup of tea. It's got Norse gods, family drama, and a big cast of powerful characters who want to use Danny for one reason or another. Like I said, our main man Danny has incredible power and he's still figuring out how to use it while under threat from those who either want to take his power away or just plain kill him. It's a running and gunning YA thrill ride in which OSC balances modern life and ancient magic. Not my favorite series from him, but far from his worst. Next on my list is Pathfinder. I just talked about this one in my recent time travel books video. Like many of OSC's other books, this one has a male teenage protagonist with a gift. His name is Rig, and he can see the paths of living beings through time. And after his dad dies, Rig goes searching for his long-lost sister while trying to figure out his powers. He's joined by Umbo, another character who can slow down time. And with their powers combined, they're Captain Planet! No, they can actually just travel into the past and change it. And alongside this story is another connecting one about an Earth colony spaceship seeking a new home. This book goes by fast, confuses you a little with its magic system, but ultimately delivers the goods. Up next is Shadow of the Hegemon, which is book 2 in the Ender's Shadow series, aka the Bean series. Taking place soon after the war with the Buggers, the war games have shifted to Earth, where our brilliant little tactician Bean teams up with Ender's older brother Peter to get humanity going down the right-ish path. And some of that strategy even includes using the power of the written word. Huzzah! Like I've mentioned in some of the previous Bean books, there's a lot of global politicking and military strategy here. If that's what you're into, it's tough to beat OSC at the height of his powers. Besides the tween geniuses helping countries wrestle for power, this book shines in how it builds the relationships between Bean and Peter, Bean and Petra, and Bean and Achilles. Yes, that's right, the charming psycho Achilles is back to his best evil ways, which I am totally here for. I mean, honestly, this book is kind of more of the same. It's obvious OSC enjoys his main characters too much to remove any of them out of the equation, but that's okay. The verbal and mental sparring is what I'm here for. Okay, let's talk about Shadows in Flight, which is book number 5 in the Bean series. If you keep reading the Bean series, surprisingly, the 5th book gets pretty good. By this point, Bean has kids, all of whom are really similar to him. They're super smart, but they share his genetic defect. So Bean is even more bound and determined to find a cure for his ailment. This might be the OSC book I read the most recently, and it stuck with me. And the reason I like this book so much is that it's less about politics and more a good old-fashioned space opera. It's also shorter and simpler, so you don't have to wade through a convoluted plot or anything. And it's really kind of a back-to-the-basics type of book. It returns to the bread and butter of this series, extremely intelligent kids with specialized skills solving problems. But now they're Bean's kids, so for those of you who read this series so far, you have an even stronger attachment to them. And let's keep trucking along to The Lost Gate. This is the first book in the Myther Mages series, and it's the coming-of-age YA story about Danny North, who doesn't seem to have magical powers like everyone else in his family, but oh wait, guess what? Yes, he actually does, and they're awesome. So he has to harness his gate mage powers, which let him create portals between different worlds. And since his abilities are a no-no in this magical world, he has to run away to stay alive. While keeping away from those who want him dead, he'll also be working on perfecting his powers, learning about his family history, and coming to terms with the much wider magical battle that's being waged around him. Running parallel to the Danny story is the Wad story, and he's also a gate mage, but he's on another world. He's finally free from being imprisoned inside a tree for 1,000 years, but he can't remember much of anything. As the novel goes, we unravel the mystery around him, and Wad's tale is perhaps even more interesting than Danny's. At the end of the day, this is a YA hero journey that isn't annoying. The dialogue is excellent, and OSC makes the world believable enough to hook you. Next up is Shadow of the Giant, which is book number 4 in the Bean series. Political and military strategy get their moment in the sun again, but it's never boring. Trust me, I would have abandoned any one of these books if that ever became the case, but OSC kept throwing in little wrenches and deepening the characters and plot as the series moves along. War, what is it good for? Peter Wiggins tries to make that case in this book, while also trying to consolidate power and lead the world into a peaceful future. The other portion of the book deals with Bean, Petra, and their kids. This side of the story is heartbreaking for a few reasons, but I'm not going to ruin anything for people who haven't read these yet. Suffice it to say that having kids and making decisions on behalf of them is tough. This series showed us huge arcs for Battle School kids, new and old. We got to see them grow from children to young adults, dealing with massive problems the whole time. So this book pretty much wraps up the Bean series, but as I already mentioned, it does continue still since a couple of threads aren't resolved. But when it comes to the Bean series, this feels like a good stopping point. So if you wanted to quit reading it right here, you could. You just always wonder what finally happened to Bean. The next book on my list is Speaker for the Dead, which is book 2 in the Ender Saga series, and it's also the winner of the Nebula and Hugo Award. This sequel to Ender's Game is set far from Earth and, thanks to time dilation, 3,000 years in the future. Now in his 30s, Ender is trying to escape his reputation as an alien killer. The story is set on Lusitania, a planet where the aliens known as Pequeninos live. And these creatures, which are also called piggies, are so great. OSC does a terrific job of bringing them and their world to life. Speaker for the Dead is way different than Ender's Game. There's a murder mystery vibe to it, with Ender acting as the detective who's trying to figure out why humans are dying on this planet, and do the piggies have anything to do with it? This book also features a slower pace than its predecessor, but it totally works. Ender is going through all the feels since he's still processing his role in exterminating an entire species. And that's why this book is high on emotional content. There's guilt, forgiveness, redemption, and the need to care for others, even when they're vastly different. In short, this book gets deeper than Ender's Game did. It's a more mature novel that works your thinker more than the original. And getting the bronze medal in my Orson Scott Card Olympics is Pastwatch, The Redemption of Christopher Columbus. A few hundred years in the future, some academics have the ability to study the past, remaining invisible as they witness events and individuals. But are they really invisible? Once these future scientists realize that they can affect the past, but they'll really only have one shot to change human history for the better, the question becomes, when, where, and with whom should they alter events? Enter Christopher Columbus, the famous Italian explorer. He takes center stage in this historical sci-fi that rewrites the history of Europe and America. There are mind-boggling twists and turns, deep dives into the motivations of characters, and really thought-provoking details. Once it gets rolling, you won't want to put Pastwatch down. It's an awesome exploration of the butterfly effect, where a single action can alter the entire flow of human civilization. You can picture the utopian society the book wants to create, and you're cheering wildly as every step in that direction succeeds. However, it's devastating when something goes wrong. Yeah, this book is an emotional roller coaster. But that's what makes this book third on my list. You're hoping for a better fictional world to come into being than the one we actually live in. And that's kind of a bummer, but it's also cathartic in some ways. Snagging my silver Orson Scott Card medal, another Hugo and Nebula Award winner is Ender's Game. Undoubtedly the most well-known book on this list, Ender's Game is a modern sci-fi classic, so you probably already know the basic plot. Ender is one of dozens of genius kids enrolled in a military space school that's training these children to become the next generation of leaders. Why do you need young leaders? Because Earth is at war with an alien race called the Buggers. Card shows Ender's personality and smarts in a lot of different ways. Many of those when the cards are stacked against Ender. We get to see Ender's ability to form friendships, his clever strategies, and what he does when force seems like the only option. At times you forget that these are child prodigies who are in competition with one another. It's a cutthroat, high-pressure environment where only the best and brightest survive. This combo of setting, plot, and characters makes Ender's Game absolutely riveting, and in my mind, the second best OSC book in his catalog. And number one, snagging my personal Orson Scott Card gold medal, is Ender's Shadow. That's right, I'm doing it, people. I'm putting Ender's Shadow above Ender's Game. Now, let me just say that there's no Ender's Shadow without Ender's Game. You have to read Game first. But Bean is a better character than Ender, plain and simple. Yep, this is the Bean spin-off novel you never knew you needed. While he played a bit part in Ender's Game, Bean gets the starring role in this book as we learn about where he came from before Battle School. And let's be clear, it was a hard-knock life for little Beanerito. An undersized orphan from the streets of Rotterdam, Bean's quick thinking and survival skills catch the attention of the military, leading him to Battle School. Though small in stature, Bean's mind is perhaps the sharpest in the entire Enderverse, and he's one of the toughest kids as well. This book has the same type of intense, action-packed training sequences and battles as Ender's Game, but by really fleshing out Bean's backstory and making this book take his POV, Card shows off Bean's hidden strength in the vulnerabilities that shape his decisions. Bean is one of the best OSC characters ever because we understand his mental, physical, emotional, and psychological state. We know Bean backwards and forwards, but he still manages to surprise us with his unrivaled genius. There you have it, my rankings of the 16 Orson Scott Card books I've read. Do you agree, disagree, or have other OSC books I need to read? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Happy reading.